and welcome to a new course. I'm Grandmaster Damian Lemos here for TheChessWorld.com. This time we'll talk about the Colle system for white, also known as Colle System. So for this intro, I've chosen a game of mine, a game I played against a strong Grandmaster, Jacobian, 2600 plus Grandmaster. So without further ado, let's dive in. We'll mention the key move orders when it comes to the Colle system for white. We start off with d4. Black can either play knight f6 or d5. So after d5 we play knight to f3. Black plays knight f6, and here key move for white, e3. If we play c4, that would be the queen's gambit. When we play the Colle system, we want to build up a solid foundation. We want to get outer pieces out. Usually the bishop goes out to d3. Bishop c1, which is now stuck inside the pawn chain, usually goes out via b3 and bishop b2. So we get a reliable and solid system for white, which, by the way, if you think about it, this is like playing Queen's Gambit declined with an extra move for white. So let's pay attention to this position. If black plays c5 here, what we're doing as white is we're playing a Queen's Gambit declined with an extra move. So to illustrate the point, let's see what happens if we're playing black. Our opponent plays d4, play d5, he goes c4. If he plays the Queen's Gambit, we can decline the gambit playing e6, knight c3. Now we can play knight f6, bishop e7. Again, we were playing Queen's Gambit declined. Here, compared to a Colle system, we're moved behind as black. And this is one of the most solid systems black can play against the Queen's Gambit. So imagine playing the same system as white with an extra move. That has to be good for white. So the other move order we can get a Colle system from is d4. Black plays knight f6. Here we play knight to f3. And a lot of Indian players, Queen's Indian players, they like playing this move order with e6. Here we can still play e3, and we get a Colle system as white. Again, we're likely to play bishop d3, we are likely to play b3. So those are the move orders. Now let's see my game against Grandmaster Jacobian. What we'll do throughout the course is we'll analyze a lot of games. We'll focus on the ideas, because it is key to know that when it comes to positional line like the Colle system, it's all about understanding the ideas. We might have to remember a few things, but so long as we know the ideas, we are good to go. So my game against Jacobian, I played d4, black plays knight f6, I played knight f3, e6, and here I wasn't in the mood to play c4, which is, by the way, the main line. Here black can play d5, that would be a Queen's Gambit, bishop b4, Bobo Indian, b6, Queen's Indian. So those are topics for another course. Here I just wanted to play a Colle system with a solid foundation, and now after e3 black plays c5. He's got a lot of ways to play. He can play c5, he can play d5, he can play b6, and black can just be flexible and he can decide later on what to do with his pawns. So what we'll do here in this first chapter is we'll mention ideas, and then as we analyze more games, we're gonna cover every single system black can play. So in this game my opponent plays c5, and here I play bishop to d3. So as you can see, playing this as white is straightforward. We'll play bishop d3, we're likely to castle, then we'll play b3 and bishop b2. The thing is, c2, we might play c4, we might leave the pawn on c2, we might play c3, as we'll see in this game. So here, black goes d5. There are other lines as well. He can take on d4, he can play b6. So here, my opponent goes for d5. And here I think there is a key concept to mention already. Once he plays d5, he's playing a Queen's Gambit fashion. Then his bishop on c8 might struggle later on, and that's something we'll see in this game. If he goes d5 and then if he goes b6 and bishop b7, that's alright for black. That being said, that bishop on b7 is on a closed diagonal, so if he goes for d5, that's something to remember. As black, if he goes b6, then he can try a similar approach. However, he'll have that open diagonal, so as white will have to plan accordingly. So what I'm trying to say is there are different approaches for black, and each approach has pros and cons. So here my opponent goes for d5, and now I play b3. So now we've got something specific about the move order. b3 is not the only move. White can play here. White can castle. I can even play something like c3 and knight bd2, which by the way is a different approach. When we play like this, we might not play b3 and bishop b2 at all. When we play knight d2, c3 and knight d2, the idea is to one day play e4 and get our bishop c1 out via f4 or g5. So c3 is an option, building up the strong center, the London system center as white, so that's one option. Castling short is of course another move. The reason I didn't castle here is that black, on top of the natural moves he can play, he can also try c4, and then after bishop e2, there are some lines where black gets a lot of space on the queen side, and it's not easy for white to counterattack. That being said, if you get a position like this, remember that b3 is an option. We might play, if he goes b5, we can play a4. So there are ways for white to fight for the queenside space here. Now, if you want to know the actual lines after c4, bishop b2, I believe here black can play b5 right away. And there's some theory here, and I feel black has enough resources to equalize, and I quite like the space advantage he's got there, and that's the only reason why when he plays c5 here, or d5, I think d5 was his last move. Now, I feel c4 is a positional threat, and I know I'll play b3 anyways, so it is a good idea to play it first, and then I can just castle later. There's nothing he can do to stop me from castling kingside, so I play b3, and here is where my opponent goes for... This is not a new approach, but it's not a popular one, I'd say. Black decides to take on d4. Again, he can go for standard lines such as knight c6, bishop b7, castling kingside. He can play b6 and bishop b7. He can play in a natural way as black. Here he takes on d4. Now I take with the pawn. I think that's the only move here. Knight takes d4 looks a bit fishy at the moment because he can play, if I play knight takes, he can play e5. There are some weaknesses here as well. It doesn't look natural. In fact, e5 here I might even lose a piece. If I go knight f3, he's got e4. Well, okay, I got bishop b5 check, but once you feel something's wrong, it probably is. And here, if we take with the pawn, we keep a lot of space in the center, and let's focus on that bishop on c8 again. If black could play something like bishop g4 here, I would say black has equalized already. He might be even better because his bishop is outside the pawn chain, he's got no weaknesses. Now with that bishop there, he'll struggle to find a good diagonal for it, and this is where our strategy begins. Now that we've got a pawn on d4 and he's got the fixed pawn structure in the center, we can build up a kingside attack. That's another detail from the Colle system. Usually we get an attack on the kingside, and that's what makes the Colle system attractive. So after e takes d4, black plays bishop b4 check. So this is the idea behind my opponent's c takes d4. He wants to throw in a check, and now we more or less we have to play c3. Why? Because well, playing king e2 or king f1, we're not going to do that. If we play knight d2, then bishop c3 looks annoying. Bishop c3, knight c6 is breaking our solid system as white, so no way we play knight d2, knight f d2, same idea. That's rubbish. And if we go bishop d2, thing is, now he'll move the bishop back to d6 or e7. Now our bishop on d2 is not well placed. If we could play bishop b2, that would be better. And our pieces are not able to find the good squares. I mean, we could play knight c3, maybe, and we can relocate our knight towards the king side. I'm concerned about bishop d2 here. So after bishop b4 check, black gets what he's looking for. We play c3, he moves the bishop back, and now we could argue that we've got some weaknesses on the queen side. I don't see c3 as a weakness. I think that pawn there is solid enough. But it is fair to say black has achieved something by playing bishop b4 and bishop d6. Because now if we go bishop b2, our bishop would be on a closed diagonal, so it wouldn't be as useful as if we had a pawn on c2. So that's the reason why my opponent did what he did. Bishop b4 and bishop d6. So here after bishop d6, I thought for a while, I remember it took me a while to castle here, which by the way is a no-brainer. Black plays knight c6. So here I noticed that my opponent is not castling kingside yet. So why is black doing so? Well, because as white, there's a straightforward plan, as we'll see in this game, when we get a structure like this, that is playing rook e1, which by the way is the move I played in the game. We want to play knight e5, and then we want to develop a kingside attack. It could be playing something like queen f3, could be bringing the other knight towards the king side, it could be playing bishop g5. We've got a lot of ways to develop a kingside attack here. So perhaps black, by not castling kingside yet, he might be flexible enough to go for a queenside castle. So that's what I was thinking during the game when he played knight c6, and that's the reason I played rook to e1, because what else? If I don't play rook e1 here, if I play bishop b2, which is the standard move, then my bishop is in a closed diagonal. I'm not able to play knight e5 here because I've got a pawn on c3. If I had a pawn on c2, then bishop b2 looks interesting because it supports knight e5. Here, knight e5 is not an option, so bishop b2 doesn't look great. The other concept I thought about during the game, let's say I'll play whatever, rook b8. Now, I could try playing something like c4 at some point. It is interesting. The thing is, I'm committing myself to playing with hanging pawns, and that's a decision I have to make as white, whether I want to play with hanging pawns or not. I would never take with the bishop here, because then my pawn d4 is isolated, and if I take with the b3 pawn, it might be fine. I'm not saying this is wrong for white. All I'm saying is that since I've got a pawn on c3, it's not easy to decide what to do as white, whether to play c4 or not. If I do play c4, then I know I'll end up with hanging pawns. So that's the other key concept to consider. What else I considered during the game? Okay, I thought about bishop a3, which is a quiet move as white. I realized bishop a3 is, the trade is favoring white, because if you think about it, bishop d6 is his best bishop. Bishop c8 still questionable, so here I can trade. Knight takes. I think we're perhaps slightly better as white, because we still got ways to reposition our pieces. That bishop has no good diagonals, so I thought this was solid enough, and it is actually risk-free. We've got plenty of play on dark squares, and it's not easy for black to free his position up playing e5. So this was, to be honest, was a safe approach. For some reason I was in a fighting mood in this game, and I played rook e1. When I played rook e1, I remember I said to myself, I can still play bishop a3 later on. I want to make sure knight e5 is an option, and since I haven't played bishop b2, I might be able to just get my bishop out via g5. So being flexible pays off. Maybe bishop g5, bishop h4, bishop g3. I'll still get the trade if I want to. So here black plays b6. Still, we see black being flexible, not castling kingside. I think we have to see that, because this is such a natural move he can play. Now if he castles kingside, we can just play knight e5. That's probably what I would have played had he castled kingside here. Knight e5, bishop f4. I would still bring all of my pieces towards the kingside if possible. If he goes something like bishop d7, this is just a random line by the way, but I want to mention a concept. If he goes bishop d7 here, there's no way I'm taking that bishop unless I'm winning a piece or something. I'm not trading my knight for bishop d7. Why? Because bishop d7 is still a bad bishop, and my knight on e5 is powerful. So if he goes a move like bishop d7, I like bishop f4. Then if I can transfer my queen towards the king side, playing queen f3, queen h3, that's sharp, looks dangerous for black. Then knight d2, knight f3. So there are a lot of annoying things going on for black here, and that's probably the reason why he didn't castle yet. The concept I wanted to mention, because we might not get this in other games, is that if we get a position like this, and he's got that bishop on d7, we can try a trick that happens a lot in the London system. Let's say he goes rook c8, now bishop d6 is hanging, so we have knight takes f7, we attack the queen, we attack the bishop. Now when he takes, we just take, and not only we've won a pawn, we also end up with a much better position. So that's probably winning for white. So what we'll do here is we'll finish this intro here, because we mentioned so many plans. There are a lot of things to point out about the move order. I think this is a lot of information to digest for the first chapter. What we'll do in the next chapter is we'll see how this middle game plays out, and then after that we'll start analyzing all of the systems black can try against the Colle system as white. So that's going to be it for this intro. I hope you found this useful. I hope you could learn something. And of course, I want to see you guys on the next one. Thank you.